a background in natural health. She is currently engaged in an art practice-based PhD with the University of Creative Arts in Farnham in the UK. And today she will be talking about the artworks and material investigations that are a result of her research into the nature of light. Sky is a multidisciplinary artist and philosopher located in Belgium, who will share some thoughts on comic art and as a means to inspire dialogue and creativity. Now, we may know or at least have thoughts about how ideas in science and art may be connected, but for people who don't know, I'll just introduce who David Bohm is. So David Bohm was a maverick physicist and philosopher of the 20th century who made great contributions to quantum physics. His ideas include the pilot wave theory, which is a new interpretation of quantum mechanics, and the idea of the implicate and the explicit order, which is it's quite a revolutionary idea in both physics and philosophy. Now, an important underlying foundation of Bohm's thought is the idea of wholeness and totality, which connects particles and ourselves to the environment and our world. Now, art was a particular interest of David Bohm's. Not only he wrote two books, one entitled On Creativity, and another co-written by my grandfather, F. David Peat, and it was called Science, Art, and Creativity. But he has also had correspondence with various artists, in particular Charles Biederman. These conversations were then also compiled and published as a book called the Bohm-Biederman Correspondence. Now we can see how Bohm's ideas have inspired artists, but first let's look at how scientists and artists have come together and inspired each other. So I'll just start my presentation. I have a little slideshow prepared. If it, yeah, perfect. So if we can go on the first slide. So these are sort of the different relationships I'll be exploring. Of course, there are many more, but mainly I'll be looking at mathematicians as artists. I'll be looking a little bit about the Enlightenment, some scientific art theories, some uses of technology for art, some artists inspired by science, and finally, science making art. Have next slide, please. Next slide. Okay. Oh, the first one. One with Piero. There we go. So in medieval times, the line between artists and scientists was always very fine. Like Leonardo da Vinci, Piero della Francesca, and Paolo Uccello are just a few of those artists that left mathematical clues in their paintings. In Piero della Francesca here, the Baptism of Christ, the painting plays a lot with the number 3. Whether it is a triangle that surrounds Jesus, formed by the dove, John the Baptist, and the tree, but also the 3 figures on Jesus' right, which sort of symbolically represent the Trinity. Next slide. In Paolo Uccello, we can see the use of geometry to use a little perspective in the forefront, as the lines created by the broken weapons on the floor sort of follow the perspective line. Now, I say a little bit in the forefront, just because in the background we can see very big figures compared to how far they are. Next slide, please. And yes, and finally, Leonardo da Vinci, probably the most mathematically artist there is, in this case, the Vitruvian Man, which sort of shows the perfect proportions of a human figure that can fit in a square and a circle. Next slide. Now, with the Enlightenment, we start to have a different relationship with art. Enlightenment preached rationalism, empiricism, and utilitarianism. The Enlightenment regarded some disciplines, such as art and pure philosophy, as sort of unimportant. So art was put in a difficult position here. The relationship between art and the relationship with art, therefore, had changed, as art shouldn't just paint the beautiful, a concept that is sort of difficult to define anyway and not very useful, but rather art should become a witness and evidence of the world, preserving events in history. And what is regarded worth preserving during the Enlightenment? Science, of course. Artists start finding interest in painting experiments. In this case, we've got Rembrandt painting the Anatomy Lesson by Nicholas Tulp, which sort of shows the advancements in anatomy of the time. Next slide. So in England, we've got Joseph Wright of Thurby, for example, who liked very much the latest experiments. This painting is called A Philosopher Lecturing on the Orrery. The Orrery was a sort of a mechanical model of the solar system. One aspect of the Enlightenment art that really comes across here is the use of light. Science at the time started focusing on the study of light. Like, for example, they started doing early versions of the double slit experiment. Here, there's only one light source, which is at the center of the orrery, which is supposed to be basically the sun, which sort of reflects in this painting with incredible use of both light and shadow. Next slide, please. So now we're looking at some scientific art theories. So here we've got Brunelleschi, Filippo Brunelleschi, who was a Florentine architect, famous for his design of the Duomo of Santa Maria del Fiore, which is in Florence. But for artists, he is maybe more famous for his work on linear perspective. So with the use of geometry, Brunelleschi was able to reproduce depth in a 2D plane. This was done by establishing the so-called vanishing points, which in this image are the VP. And all the lines of the object represented should be sort of directional towards this. So Brunelleschi was able to reproduce this theory also into architecture, giving a sense of depth and space to buildings compared to the sort of regular cubical buildings. So in this image, we've got the baptistry of St. John, which is just in front of the Duomo in Florence, which he designed. Next slide. So here we've got, we're moving on to paintings. So we're looking at George Seurat, who developed the artistic movement of pointillism. So basically paintings composed entirely of dots. So the reason for this is actually scientific. As canvases are usually white, Seurat had the insight of using the negative space between the dots to create light from the picture, therefore making the paintings brighter. Next slide. So just like Seurat, Mondrian as well focused on scientific art theory. In this case, color theory and structures. Even Bohm, in his essay on creativity, parallels science and art, as they both realized around this time, which is the 20th century, that symbols and representations simply weren't enough to describe the world around us. Artists and scientists in this way need to look back at the fundamentals, such as structure and order, whether it means creating a new art movement, like Mondrian created structuralism, or create a new order in science, as David Bohm attempted. Next slide. So now we're going to look a little bit at different uses of technology for art. So Albrecht Dürer, he was a famous artist and mathematician. He too left many mathematical clues in his paintings, but more particularly, he was also interested in measurement. So here in this drawing, we've got represented a female model posing for a drawing, and the artist that studies the model through a grid that is also present on his piece of paper. The idea here is that each square on the piece of paper is supposed to match what the artist sees through the grid. Next slide. So here we've got Canaletto, who was a Venetian born and is famous for his Venetian landscapes. This painting is a regatta on the Grand Canal, which sort of represents a traditional festival in Venice. Now, the main thing that strikes me the most about Canaletto's paintings, but especially this one, is not only its size, like this painting is almost 2 meters wide, but also the extreme detail. As we can see on the right, those are just close-ups of the painting. However, Canaletto does have a catch. Next slide, please. Canaletto apparently used the camera obscura. A camera obscura is basically an early form of a photograph. So the camera obscura was able to basically play with mirrors and light to capture and project the image onto a wall or a piece of paper so that the artist could basically trace the image to create his painting and then color it in later. Next slide. Thank you. So Frank Hurley was an Australian photographer and explorer and was appointed as the official photographer of World War I. Photographs like these show the epic battles fought by the brave soldiers. However, especially in this image, this never happened. Next slide. Almost a precursor of Photoshop, Frank Hurley would superimpose separate images of airplanes, explosions, trenches, soldiers, to create these images to basically glorify the war and hopefully try to get more recruits. Next slide, please. So in the same way that Hurley uses altered images, the same concept became the basis of early special effects. So, for example, in Star Wars, most of the backgrounds here were hand-painted and superimposed with the recorded material. So in this case, we've got Return of the Jedi, where this is just a scene from the Death Star, where basically all the stormtroopers, all the backgrounds, and the spaceship were all hand-painted. And in the little white box that I've drawn there, that is the only space where the recorded video would be. Next slide, please. So special effects usually stay on screen, but with the Gorillaz, it can also be on stage. We're not talking about strobe lighting, and we're not talking about pyrotechnics. Basically, Gorillaz, each member of the Gorillaz, which was basically a popular band in the 90s and the noughties, developed a character in animation form that would appear in their music videos. These animations would though also appear on stage as holograms instead of the actual human artist. The image on the left in particular, we've got the 2006 Grammy Awards, where we've got 2 members of the Gorillaz in animation form, but Madonna is also there in real life, sort of duetting. Next slide, please. Now, this is where it gets a little weird, because as technologically advanced the Gorillaz seemed in 2006, 14 years now have passed. Meet little Miquela, an artist, YouTuber, and let's call her a internet personality that is super famous, makes millions of dollars. But little Miquela does not exist. She is not a person. A semi-mysterious robotics and media organization called Broad created Little Miquela. She is a CGI celebrity. When asked if Little Miquela is real, Broad answers, she is as real as Rihanna. In 2019, Little Miquela appeared on a Calvin Klein ad campaign where she kisses real-life supermodel Bella Hadid. On the right is an image of the same campaign, where Bella is the girl on the left, real life, and on the right is completely computer generated. And somehow, weirdly, they're interacting. Next slide, please. Going back to sort of real life, in 1905, Einstein sees his Annus Mirabilis, the year where he publishes 4 papers, each one starting the physics of the 20th century, in particular relativity and quantum physics. Pablo Picasso then, same as the rest of the world, had entered a world of relativism and probability that became inspiration for Picasso's work. In this way, the art movement called Cubism was developed, where not only we see a figure from different perspectives, enforcing the relativity of the world, but also managed to insert time on a 2D canvas representing a 3D object. Next slide, please. Here we've got Antony Gormley. Following encounters with physicists, sculptor Antony Gormley started a series of sculptures of different sizes called Quantum Cloud. The sculpture is composed of a series of tetrahedrals, which if seen from a particular angle, it creates an image of a person. To create this image, a computer calculated a random walk algorithm, usually used to describe movements of particles, to determine the position of each part. Gormley was enchanted by Bohm's ideas, which he learned from an encounter with David Peat and Basil Hiley. In particular, Gormley was interested in the idea of process and transformation. In Quantum Cloud, we have a mesh of elements that could represent particles, trajectories, or both. Just as in quantum physics, the observer becomes the determiner of the sculpture. So, depending on the observer's relative position to the sculpture, we see different images of a person, or just a mesh of objects. With this artwork, Gormley wants to show how we, the audience, become participants in the transforming and dynamic world, as we ourselves are always becoming and emerging as we move around the artwork. Next slide, please. So here we have Eric J. Heller, who is a scientist and artist based in Harvard University. These artworks that he has created are works created by computer simulations. So using scientific computer code to create these images, whether it's a calculation of an electron flow or an animation of the wave-particle duality of atoms. He says that his work is not didactic, and almost none of it would be publishable in scientific literature. However, the aim of these works is not to teach us a lesson of quantum mechanics, yet it is to uncover the mystery of quantum physics by these striking images. To me, this is almost a perfect marriage of science and art, as well, the function of art in this case is to reveal the world as it is, beyond the visible, beyond the tangible, and the scientific tools and information to demonstrate these ideas. Next slide, please. And finally, we have Hubble. 30 years in orbit this year. The Hubble Telescope is the best telescope available to mankind. Hubble transmits images of the cosmos almost daily, images that not only have great aesthetic value, but is even richer in scientific value. These images don't just show us what nebulae look like this image of the pillars of creation, but it's also a snapshot of the past, as light has traveled a relatively long time to reach Hubble, revealing the secrets of the origin of the universe. However, the transmission from Hubble to Earth doesn't look like this. These images have been processed using different filters, different spectrometers, by scientists and computers, and have been sort of colored in. Colors determined by the signal's radiation, by the wavelength, by the distance, and by the speed. Even if there wasn't an artist present when this image was conceived, I believe that these images do have artistic value. One could argue that these scientists themselves, translating these signals to images, to colors, are the artists. But sort of that is up to you to decide. Next slide. Next slide. No, anyway, it was just the conclusion. Thank you all for listening. Hopefully I haven't been boring. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James. Thank you so much. So, Jane, do you want to have a little break of some kind, or do we just move on to Peta?
Well, it's up to you. We can have a moment of reflection if it was too much.
And then Peta can already prepare to come next.
Sure.
So Peta, whenever you're ready.
Okay, I'm ready. So thank you very much for this opportunity to share my work with you. I am going to read my presentation because it's quite involved for me to just express. So I've written it all down so I don't miss anything. So please bear with me for that. So I'm going to screen share now. So this didn't happen. Oh, here we go. Okay, so during this presentation, I will give a description of some of my art pieces, and then you'll see several rolling images of artworks that are inspired by the quantum physics. And these will follow while I explain the ideas behind my art. My words won't necessarily tie up with what is on the screen at a particular moment. Although the concepts in the work are difficult, the artworks are colourful, playful, and in the flesh, if you were to really see them, engage the viewer. All the images are straight photographs of the work, and they are not digitally created. Only 3 monochrome materials create this image: black paper, a thin shaft of white light, and diffraction grating, a milky white acetate film. The colour spectrum, which is normally hidden within white light, is revealed. The fountains of colour are nothing more than an optical effect that dynamically dances and changes as the viewer moves position. In viewing this work, perceptions and a fixed viewpoint are challenged. The work is an entangled exploration of diffraction grating, a material more commonly found in a science laboratory than in an artist's studio. Here is another exploration of diffraction grating. During my work, I do a series of material investigations, really interrogating different materials. The dual opposites of black dense material, entangled wire, and various black particle-like objects, and ephemeral white light are unified by shifting rainbow-hued penumbras which emerge. The colours one sees in the spectrum ghosting are not as a result of the surface colour of the objects, but are a purely optical effect generated by diffraction, which unravels the hidden spectrum wavelengths. Where the light butts up against the edges of the black and grey elements, the edges are shifting, imprecise, and ill-defined. They are indeterminate. They eventually separate off altogether, increasingly diffuse virtual spots that appear to lift off from each other to reside on dimensional planes of their own, dynamically shifting position and changing shape as the viewer alters the viewing position. the active entangled relationship between the viewer and object is made explicit, just in the same way as Antony Gormley's cloud that James has just spoken about. This drawing is an abstract imagined representation of an unfolding, conveying a moment frozen in the process of becoming and made in response to David Bohm's theories of the implicate order. Referencing particle-wave duality, a wave unfurls from the background field and twists itself inside out to transform into a curvaceous, lozenge-shaped seed-like form. In the drawing, the repeating dots stretch and morph to differentiate the emerging 3D form from the background. Their rhythmic repetition combines to compose the image and indicates that wholeness and unity coexist with multiplicity. In this detail, the Japanese paper substrate has a blotting paper softness that allows the colours normally hidden and implicit in black ink to bleed and separate and escape the boundary of the drawn marks, revealing the multicoloured makeup of the black ink. There's a tension between the diffuse expanded marks of the underlying ground and the crisp edges of those of the lozenge shape. The contrasting definition delineates the crystallizing shape of the emerging unfolding form, indicating how objects might appear to be separate once they unfold from an implicate state into the explicate manifest order of things. In another detail, the shiny surface of the dichroic rings catch the light and reflect unexpected colours. The rings appear to be completely transparent. The black dots are reflected as a variety of colours determined by the viewing angle of the dichroic material. The dots seen through the film are always the complementary opposite of the dots that are reflected. Green with magenta, red with cyan, and blue with yellow. These opposite colours are hopelessly entangled, simultaneously shifting together with every change in viewing angle. The opposites are forever linked and exist in partnership, portraying quantum entanglement. This is where particles can be linked together so that the change made in the state of one particle is immediately reflected in the state of the other. A key theme of my work is unifying or going beyond dualities, and lenticular flip technology is useful in materializing this. It has the potential to hold opposites without each cancelling the other out. Here, two versions of one image are interlaced together. The photograph itself, which is positive, and its color inverse, negative. Below the main image, you see three views of the same artwork from different angles to show the positive-negative oscillation. The complementary opposite of emerald green is magenta and black's negative is white. When you view it in the flesh, the colours oscillate, each becoming the opposite. At the same time, the background switches from black to white and white to black. Each of these viewpoints holds its own truth. Neither is predominant, each view is equally true. The dualities are unstable and fluctuating, and due to the visual ambiguity, certainty and fixedness are questioned, offering a potential for perceptual transformation. In determining the correct pitch for aligning interlaced photos with the lenticular grating film, there is a strong potential for a moire interference pattern to ruin the effect if there's the slightest misalignment. This is normally an unwanted problem. However, I was curious as to the possibilities of exploiting this moire effect to artistic advantage. As moire gives dramatic physical form to the optical complexities of interference effects, I was able to exploit them to bring dynamic movement to static photographs. Notice that the center of the vortex is white when seen directly from the front of the artwork in the first view. When it is seen from an oblique angle, the center of the vortex is black, and the colors of all the other regions are also reversed. This deliberately created moire effect creates psychedelic movement as viewers pass by, the rings rippling outwards or inwards depending on the direction they walk. That should have been a little film that has disappeared. I'm sorry, just to show that it didn't happen. So I am now going to explain the thinking behind my work while some images roll over the screen. In the beginning, I naively asked, what is light? However, the more I studied its nature, the more mysterious it became. Exploring light through art making drove my desire to deepen my understanding of science behind this amazing phenomenon. Arthur Zajonc, a physicist in quantum optics, explains how light is in fact invisible, and we only know of its presence by the way it touches matter, illuminating the surfaces of objects in its path, even if these are small molecules of fog or mist in the sky. A deep probing from a scientific perspective questions whether light is a particle or a wave, or indeed both at the same time. I encountered the bizarre and paradoxical world of quantum physics, phenomena at the edge of known reality. When I tell people I'm inspired by quantum physics, they often glaze over, and this is understandable with its baffling properties of non-locality, superposition, entanglement, and the like. Moreover, there is a disconnect between the quantum world and the world of our senses. My understanding is a self-taught layman's understanding, so apologies to any physicists if I get some of this slightly incorrect. Nonetheless, as art is another form of knowing, I have learned much of what I understand from these difficult ideas through engagement with materials that hint at the quantum questions. I was drawn to a variety of materials intuitively for their optical qualities, only to later discover that they are apparatus in the two-slit experiments. Beam splitters such as prisms, half-silvered mirror and dichroic materials, and also diffraction gratings, the two slits of the experiment being the simplest form of a diffraction grating. These materials are optical tricksters and are useful to represent quantum phenomena at human scale. I found I could exploit their qualities to aesthetic advantage. My access into the quantum world is through this famous two-slit experiment. Thomas Young's experiment of 1801 showed that light is a wave, leading to the later two-slit experiments with both electrons and photons that show that they have both wave and particle behaviors. Strangely, which one, particle or wave, depends on whether the path of the particle through the apparatus is observed or not. The results of the experiments are bizarre. Physicists still argue about the interpretations today, and many fundamental quantum questions arise. Einstein's general relativity and quantum mechanics see it differently, from deterministic and indeterministic points of view, respectively. David Bohm, who considered matter to be condensed or frozen light, pondered deeply on the two-slit experiments. And like French physicist Louis de Broglie, he argued that reality was not a wave or a particle, rather it was a wave and a particle at the same time. The pilot wave that James mentioned in his talk. Bohm felt that particles and their trajectories must exist independently of observation while still maintaining the uncertainty principle of quantum mechanics. He developed theories that supported his viewpoint, proposing a deterministic formulation of quantum theory that nonetheless permits quantum phenomena such as non-locality. He continued to develop his theories until his death in 1992, and to this day, no one has yet disproved them. Wave-particle duality is a recurring motif in the artworks. My intention is to present experiences of both simultaneously, coming from a position of not either or, but either or and both. Bohm's theories reveal an underlying interconnected wholeness to reality, where the manifestation of all forms is the result of endless enfoldings and unfoldings. We experience the explicate order, unfolded manifest forms that exhibit properties of separateness. However, these are connected by the underlying wholeness of the deeper enfolded implicate order. Philosophically, Bohm felt strongly that the root of many problems facing the planet stem from our sense of separateness, or what he called fragmentation. One thing that this pandemic is teaching us at the moment is that we are, in fact, all connected, one big global family. Bohm used the metaphor of folding to help us visualize his implicate and explicate orders. The French for fold is pli, and pli is in both words, implicate and explicate. Folding was a useful starting point for my thinking and making, and many of the artworks explore notions of folding, both physically and conceptually. As well as folding soft materials, I play with ideas of unfolding space through mirrors, and I unfold light into its spectrum colors. Bohm also coined the term hollow movement, the dynamic interconnected process through which everything in the explicate order arises. It links the ideas of the undivided wholeness of the intricate order with what he called the universal flux, a state where everything is in a state of process or becoming and can only be known implicitly. As movement is key to hollow movement, many of my works have a kinetic quality and present different views depending on the viewer's vantage point. And to sum up, in his essay on the relationship of science and art of 1968, Bohm described how he had already discovered a new way of understanding through talking and corresponding with artists, and by the embodied cognition he gained by looking at art. He acknowledged that the influence of art and artists significantly helped his own scientific research, enabling him to break free from the constraints of the usual scientific approach that led him to looking at structure with a fresh view, directly with his senses, so that his mind was freed to consider new ideas of structure. In turn, he felt that scientific ideas about structure could be equally meaningful to artists. And I quote, "Not so much because they suggest particular ideas to be translated into artistic form, but rather because if they are understood at a deep level, they will change one's way of thinking about everything, including art." And I will attest to that myself. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Peta. Maybe we just take a little breath looking at
Yes, it's quite dense stuff, isn't it?
Oh, it's beautiful. But we have one more. So thank you, Peta. And that was beautiful. And now we move to Sky, another artist, the third artist of today, who will be sharing her work, and then we will move into a conversation with each other in breakouts. So welcome, Sky. Over to you.
Hi. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, James. Thank you, Peter. So now I have the task to make this all work out with my third presentation. I just want to thank Pari Center for giving me the opportunity to give this talk. This is in fact the first. I've never talked about my artwork in this way, and it's not in my native tongue, so bear with me if I make some mistakes. I'll do my best. Well, I think you better just hop into my presentation. Let me just see if I can share my screen.
Yes, do you see how it works?
Yeah, I'm just looking for my PowerPoint application.
Take your time.
It's gone. Hold on. Exit full screen.
So right now we don't see your screen yet.
No, I'll try again. It's not in my list. I don't understand how. One moment, sorry.
It's okay.
I've never had this problem.
So if you can you find it on your desktop? So you just
Yeah, I'll just share my whole screen perhaps, because yeah, that'd be the most simple. Here we go. Is it sharing now?
no. So it's if you click the green button, share screen, then
No.
you click the.
You have to know I work in IT. This is happening.
It always happens at the worst moment, isn't it? But it's okay. We can take
And I
it.
tested this yesterday. It was working fine. Show all windows. Hold on. There we are.
There you are. Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay, let's start. Sorry for this. Yeah, there we are. Okay. So now for the non-French speaking people, ceci n'est pas une fenêtre means this is not a window. Maybe this is also not a Bluetooth that you're seeing. Okay. Now, here, at first, I composed these two questions when I was asked to give this presentation, but then I realized that this covers a whole lot of ground. So to make things more simple, what I did was I reformulated this question to this. Can comic strips serve as a medium for dialogue and meditation? In this talk, I'll be showing you some things about Bohm, what Bohm had to say on dialogue. We'll be looking at meditation and the activity of reading comics. We'll be showing how comic strips can be used as a portal to the implicate order. I'll also show you some examples of the Winds on Clouds comic project that I'm working on. And with this respect, I'll show you some techniques that can help inspire dialogue through the artwork. Okay, so starting off, I think most people in this room are familiar with David Bohm's views on dialogue, but just to freshen up your memory, at the end of his life, David Bohm got very interested in group dialogue. He wrote a book about it. He organized meetings. Well, the idea was to get people together, have them communicate, so that it will bring about a change in consciousness and the way they were looking at each other and themselves. So I give you this quote that he had to say about dialogue. So he said, dialogue can be considered as a free flow of meaning between people in communication. And it may turn out that such a form of free exchange of ideas and information is of fundamental relevance for transforming culture and freeing it of destructive misinformation so that creativity can be liberated. Now, I'm most interested in the last part of that quote, and that is what I will be showing you in the following slides. And just to inform you, at first, when I saw this quote, I thought it was in Bohm's On Dialogue book, but then I realized it's in another book. It's in the David Bohm and David Peat's book, Science, Order, and Creativity. It's a great read. Okay, now, I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with reading comics, so I just explain it to you in a couple of sentences what it's all about. So when you're reading comics, what you have is you have a sequence of images, mostly containing drawings and words. Could be without words, it depends. And just like with a normal book, literature book, you go through it and you try to visualize what's happening. You get into the story and you see what happens. Now, the storytelling is the most predominant in the comic strip business. So whether it's to tell jokes or to tell an adventure story, a dream story, anecdotal stories, which are quite popular these days, it all comes down to storytelling. Now, one can pose a question: should it always be the only aim or the only purpose of comic strips? And my answer to you is no. And just for those who are interested, I have put there's two great books on the comic book theory by Scott McCloud, but we won't get into that. So the next slide. So I have this little theory that reading comics is quite a meditative activity, because when you look at meditation, what you're doing is you're observing, measuring, weighing, comparing the movement of thought and reality. Now, compare this to what happens when you're reading comics. What you're doing is you're observing, measuring, weighing, comparing the movement of thoughts that is creating your virtual comic reality. So I hope you see what I'm hinting at. And I also would like to add that meditation, just like dialogue, requires an open mind, suspension of judgments, patience, focus, and a feeling for the whole. Now, I would like to invite you for this short reading exercise. I just give you some time to get through the panels. Okay, so I have a question. What activity was needed to read this small comic strip? Probably you haven't noticed, but there were a lot of things going on. So to enjoy this comic strip, you had to move your head slightly, you had to move your eyeballs, you had to imagine the situation, you had to interpret the drawings, you had to bring them to life in your consciousness, you had to shift between the panels, between the characters, what they're saying, what they were doing. You have to be open to surprise. So David Bohm is saying that that's a lot of tacit infrastructure at work, both in your mind and your body, without you even being conscious of it. And notice that this happened at your own tempo. There's a difference with watching a movie, which has its fixed tempo. When you're reading a comic, just like reading a book, you decide at what tempo you're going through it. And yeah, and you can compare images, return to the previous image. That's something in a movie, that's impossible. Now, moving on to the current comic project I'm working on, which is called Wind, Sun, Clouds. Let me first give you some main characteristics of the comic strip. So I'm trying to put an emphasis on movement and process. I'm also trying to inspire dialogue, which we'll discuss in the next slides. Also, there are no fixed characters, so this is quite uncommon in comic strips. Usually you have characters, a family, or whatever. Here you see there's a turtle. And also, the context will change all the time. Here, things are happening in the ocean. The next strip can be happening in a city. Next one in a forest. The sky's the limit. So, just to also inform you, these are all single-page comics with one panel that describes the context, and then a couple of panels which give you a short story to ponder about. So maybe a small explanation of why I called it Wind, Sun, Clouds. So the wind stands for the movement, the moving energy. The sun stands for creative, generative energy. And thus, and the clouds are the disruptive energy. And together they form the weather, and weather is something every creature can, well, they're familiar with. And now is maybe also a good time to give my little theory on the implicate order, which was posted in the first question and at the start of my presentation. So, from my point of view, only by the suggestions of movement, as you can see in the picture, you see the mouse throwing a brick. It suggests a movement. By looking at it and getting this feeling of motion and seeing the characters come alive in front of you, you're in fact bringing them to life in your own consciousness, in your own implicate order. So you're activating within yourself what is implicate on the outside. I think that's it goes for all forms of art. There's also David Bohm was talking about music. I don't know which book, in which he was explaining that if you're listening to music, you're actively engaging in the movement when you're hearing the notes. It's like you're, yeah, it's the same thing. The implicate is happening inside you. It's not, yeah, it's not in the room or in the music. Or now, moving on to dialogue. Is it possible to have dialogue through via comic strips? This is what I've been trying to do since last year. So this is another comic strip. I'll give you some time to go through it. I colored these in this afternoon, so I will redo this at a later time. So as I've been creating these comics, I stumbled upon a number of techniques or tools to inspire dialogue. So I will talk about these three. So we'll talk about how things are represented visually, how contexts can be juxtaposed, and I will always be also be talking about voicing the voiceless. Okay, now representation, so how things are drawn. As you can see, you can draw something very abstractly, or things can get very realistic, as you can see on in the small b on the right side. I also did a Google image search on bees. Now, if I show you the image of a real bee, you'll see there's quite some difference. This is the actual bee. If we return to the cartoon bees, you can see there's a whole lot of difference. A lot of them don't have any legs or arms. Some have 2, some have 4. A lot of them have human-like eyes. Compare this, which is quite rich in its textures and features. Now, these days, most cartoonists, so people who draw these comic strips, the current trend is abstract drawing, which can evoke a lot of emotions because you have to fill it in yourself, what you're seeing. You have to fill in the things that is missing in the picture. And it's also mostly quite static. So there's not a lot of movement going on in the picture. It's like you're looking at photographs, like you're looking at memories passing by. And it's up to you to create a story in your mind. Now, it has been my aim, and these things are still changing, but I've been trying to get more movement in my drawings. And I also try to have this mixture of what is familiar, the familiar abstractions. This is not that different from what is out there, especially the bird. But if you look at the bee, what I've been trying to do lately is to have this mixture of actual details of what a bee really looks like. And well, I don't want to get too far away from what's already the picture in our collective mind of what a bee represents. So that's what I'm exploring. Now, people who are familiar with Goethe's philosophy and science, he was into observation as well. He had this technique for looking at animals and plants. And this is quite the same. So you have to look attentively what's before your eyes. And that was also, when I was looking at the bee, I saw some new features that I hadn't seen before. I wasn't aware of the fact that the 6 legs are attached to the middle parts of the body, for example. It's something you miss, and a lot of people miss this reality. And as you know, nature is infinitely rich, so there's still a lot of other ways to depict animals and other stuff from nature. Moving on to the second technique, which I've named juxtaposition of contexts. This is something that is mostly used for single panel cartoons, which most of you are familiar with, I think. some time to. This is a Belgian cartoonist. Now, my proposal is why don't we use this in comic strips? There's one exception. There are political strips out there that use this, but they're quite a small niche, and I try to stay away from politics. That's not my thing. So returning to the B strip that I showed you earlier, so what I was doing there, in fact, was having ecology opposed to economy, as you can see, in the hope to provoke some new ideas, perhaps, in the reader's minds. Then moving on to the third technique, which I call voicing the voiceless. So here I try to give a voice to people or organisms that are hardly ever heard when it comes to social issues or whatever, even objects. As you can see, that I have a strip with this Bohm, which has a Disney-like features. This is also an example of the previous technique. So I'm using the Disney-style look with a heavy army artillery thing. So my goal here is to bring these people or organisms that are not heard, to bring them into the picture, into the discussion, and in fact, try to induce some form of dialogue. I also had to strip with a baby still in the womb that is giving her or his opinion. So just to make clear, philosophical strips aren't nothing new. These have been around for quite some time. Like these two characters, I think most of you have read this at some point in your life, I think. I'll show you another one. This is more recent from a Belgian cartoonist. So I hope everyone can see that there's one person walking away with a bag saying, "I'm not sure," while the other ones are walking around in circles in the cozy grass with pictures on their back saying, "I know." Okay, so we've come at the end now. So I hope I've taught you something about comic strips and how they can be a portal to the implicate order within us through meditation and our imagination. I've also tried to show that they can be used as an additional means of dialogue, not in group, but as a means of communication. And also that as a dialogical vessel, this way they have potential to bring insight to the reader. I've shown you my Winds and Clouds strips. And yeah, there's still much more to explore. I've only started this thing, so I'll probably make new discoveries. And I also need to note that I only started out with the idea of dialogue, putting dialogue in comic strips. I didn't have all this theory that I've now been presenting to you. It's quite, I started off intuitively and the theory came afterwards. So I had quite some work to get this into the presentation, and I hope it came true. So I'll just leave you now. I have one more slide to have a little pause, and then I'll stop sharing my screen. thank you for listening. Oh yeah, and if you're interested in more, I have more over at my website.
Thank you, Sky. I think it's actually nice. Maybe you can put a site in the chat as well. Peta did the same, and I see people appreciate it.
Okay. Wow.
So thank you, Sky. What a beautiful let's take some time first for this last one. I really appreciate how you combine all those elements, and thank you for putting language on something you probably do quite intuitively as well from within. And it's not easy to articulate that. So thank you for taking the time to do that. And now we would like to go out into breakouts. So for many of you, that's already something you're used to, but I will click a button and then an invitation will come on your screen. You'll go into groups of 3 or 4. And the invitation is to just share with each other from everything what you've heard, what resonated the most with you. What resonated with you? And not this is better than that, but like what resonated with you from what you've heard. And please ensure everybody gets to speak. Yeah, so we always say nobody speaks twice before everybody spoke once. So watch the time a bit. You have, let's say, let's say 15 minutes so that we still can hear a couple of voices, and just practice listening to each other. Enjoy, and see you in 15 minutes. So you just accept the invitation that comes on your screen. It takes a while for everybody to find their place. Okay, and we're all back. I think, yes, all rooms are closed. So welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your conversation to sharing resonance. And now we have around 5 minutes or so, which is not that long, but to hear a couple of your voices. Like, what was something that was spoken as resonance in your small group that you would like to share with the whole group? And so if everybody tries to keep it brief, we can hear a couple of voices, which is nice. You do that by, if you click on participants, there is this button, raise hand. And then, voila, Donna, please come in.
How amazing it was to see James speak of the very issues that his grandfather spoke of. I just have a new grandbaby, and it's our first, and it just moved me almost to tears to witness James not utter exactly what his grandfather would say, but clearly a transmission of learning across generations. So what an inspiration that was.
I agree, and told with such passion. So that was very, very lovely. Trisha, wait, you're muted.
Myself, I'm
Yeah.
I'm unmuted. I just wanted to say thank you to all 3 of them. James, you were superb. It was like going on a history of art tour in a very, very short period of time. And I found Peter's fascinating, but the one that really pulled at my heartstrings was Sky's, because I went into it quite comic strips, cartoon strips, what's this going to have to say? And it really caught me. I, as some of you know, I love poetry, and I suddenly realized the connection when I write poetry to what the cartoons are trying to create, that whole aha experience and a whole different perception of things. And particularly loved the last one, with the people going round and round in circles saying, I know, I know, I know, and digging themselves into the ground, while the one person went off into the woods. And may we all go into the woods. Thank you.
That's a lovely image. Claudius?
I was just greeting Tricia, but I shall share a thought.
Okay, I thought you were raising your hand like that.
And so since I'm here, 3 thoughts from our conversation. The one thought was the power of the contrasting ideas to create a dialogical experience. The other one was the gift of the COVID, that we just have time to sit and engage like this and think. And the other one is that back of this creative expression is this material called love. So that was the kind of gist of what we were talking about in our group.
Lovely.
Lovely, thank you, Claudius. Anyone else who would like to come in? Share a thought. Yeah?
Yeah, me? Can I go?
Go ahead.
I just want to say how this is my first experience of this and how uplifting it is to share with people who have different views. And I just feel I've learned so much. It's really uplifting and encouraging to see art and science discussed in the same breath. It's wonderful. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, thank you, Eve. No, it's lovely. I'm very happy Pari Center started this initiative. Chris?
I just love the combination of the 3 completely different views of the thing, all of which I find very inspiring. So James giving this the historical background was very, very well done. Well, fantastic, James. Peta really just blew my mind. I never been aware of the because I've always been very excited by the whole business of light. It's a mystery. I think it's such a fundamental mystery of light. So thank you for that. And sky, oh gosh, how I wish I could draw like that. It's terrific. And just to be able to put a message across that way, fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Let's have one more. Massimo.
Yeah, thank you. First, all the 3 presentations were great and thought-provoking. And in our small group, we appreciated the idea of working in small group because it helps to meet people, to have exchanges, meet people for the first time and have this kind of conversation. And there were many topics that suggested the idea and reflections about movement, transformation, a continuous changing, reflecting orders, and so on. But one of us, as older, was struck by the connection between meditation and comics. She was a new thing, and we concluded with this idea. So thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Massimo. And let's close with Michelle, and then I'll pass it on for the last closing remarks.
Thank you. Yeah, it was not something what came up in the group, but what came up when we were sharing here, these so different languages, these 3 very different languages that forced me to get out of my used framing and try to get into it. And it was kind of a hard job to try to follow these new languages, but it's very, very inspiring to be aware and to try at least, whoa, how's this thinking going? So that was great. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. It's actually a really nice wrap up almost of an amazing session. All 3 were so inspiring. And that's why I would love to just give all 3 maybe the possibility to give a closing sentence or whatever you would like to share, if anything. So James, anything you would like to bring in as a closing?
Hello, hello, can you hear me?
Julita?
Yes, it's me. I'm not so perfect in communication, but yeah, it works, I hope, yeah. Thank you so much. I'm first time on a Zoom conversation, and I feel like really a fantastic family. And I would like to have a more conversation, more contact, more dialogue with you, all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julita. That's so nice. And we do intend to bring more of this. And not only during COVID, but this is just the beginning of another way of coming together. So James, are you there?
Yes, I am here. Yes, I would just want to thank everyone for joining us and all these wonderful comments you've made. I've been reading the chat. It's really been amazing. So thank you all.
Thanks, James. And Peta, any closing words from your side?
Yes, I also want to thank everybody, and thank you to everybody at Pari and everybody connected with Pari. And it's just so wonderful to be part of this community and know that it's right across the world. So I very much appreciate, and I appreciate everybody taking the time to listen and see the work that I'm producing. So thank you.
Thank you, Peta, and thank you for sharing your work. And Sky?
There's no need to repeat what Peter and James were saying, so I'm just saying thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank all three of you for bringing in your work and wisdom and artistry and making us think about a lot of good things. So James, you will do the closing?
Yes. Well, again, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Julie, for hosting, and Peta and Sky for showing your work and your presentations. I just wanted to make a couple quick announcements on behalf of the Pari Center. So first of all, on June the 6th, we will be having our next Pari dialogue with Colin Tudge, who is a biologist and expert in farming, and he will basically be talking about the Great Rethink. Colin says that although the world is in a terrible state on every front, COVID-19 is just the surface of our problems. There's still time to turn things around. Also, we will also be having over the next month a July summer program entitled Infinite Potential, based on David Bohm's life and work and the documentary that was partially filmed in Pari, and sort of Pari's been the crib of this film. It was co-written by my grandfather, David Peat, and continued by Imagine Films. This is all I'm going to say for that. More information to come. Thank you all for joining us, all from everyone here at the Pari Center. See you all soon.
Thank you, James. Thank you, everybody. We can all unmute if we want.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye
Bye bye. Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.
Oh, bye.
Eleanor.
Maureen, you're hidden.
Hi, Mike.
Hi, Maureen.
Bye, Christina. Bye, Christina.
Yeah, bye. Good night.
Bye. Good night. Yeah.
Good night. Yeah.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye, Tom.
Who's that?
Bye, Steph.
Oh, yeah. Hello. Bye to everybody, and I'll be in touch again. Thank you for a wonderful hour and a half. It's wonderful.
Yeah,
Appreciate
Tom.
it.
Okay, bye, Tom. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Say hello to Aoife there, Eleanor. She's from Dublin. She didn't say anything.
Oh. Hi.
Okay.